Hashem na'aseh v'nasliyah. Parashat Bamidbar, naming of all the tribes and the leaders of those tribes. We see something very peculiar that happens in the parasha. In Bamidbar, there are 5 mentions of one of the leaders of the Shevatim, the Shevet of Gad. The leader of the Shevet of Gad was called Eliasaph ben Deuel, and this name is mentioned 5 times, except one of those 5 times, 1 out of 5, he's called Eliasaph ben Reuel. Now, there are no typos in the Torah. God doesn't make oopsie daisies, so there is no mistakes in the Torah. No one actually made a mistake and took the little top of the dalet off and made it resh. So what happened here? Why is Eliasaph ben Deuel being called ben Reuel? Rabbi Fran brings down from the Chidah Kadosh. The Chidah says something fascinating. You see, the Shevatim had leaders. Each Shevet had a Nasi in the Midbar, always. And then the encampments were broken up into 4 camps in the Midbar, and each camp had a leading Shevet, leading tribe that would lead those camps in the Midbar. Now, there were 4 camps because there were 12 tribes. 4 camps walking in the Midbar with 4 leaders. How did they choose the 4 leaders? How did they choose which Shevet is going to be the leader of one of the 4 encampments? So, we know that it was chosen by birthrights. It went to the Bechor. We know that Yaakov Avinu had 4 wives, and each Bechor, each firstborn from one of the matriarchs, that became the leader of the camps. So, however, there was one issue. You see, Yehudah, who was not a firstborn, however, he was chosen for kingship. His tribe was Malchut, and therefore, he had to have a leading role. So one of the leaders of these encampments of the 4 had to be the Shevet of Yehudah, which meant one of the other Shevatim, which would have been one of the tribes that was a Bechor of one of the mothers, had to give up theirs. Who gave up theirs when they were asked? Shevet Gad. Shevet Gad was asked to give up their spot to Yehudah. And Dan, instead, took the role out of the 4 to be one of the leaders of the encampments. And the Chidah Kadosh says that God, because he was taken and something so precious to him was taken away from him, and he didn't utter a word, he got a zechut. You know what that zechut was? That in the parasha in the Torah, he is called Eliasaph ben Reuel. Reuel comes from the word Re'el. Re'el means the friend of God. He who takes their hardship, he who takes embarrassment, he who takes something that was taken away from them, their rights, and says nothing, they become the friend of Hashem. They are called what we call Vatran. They gave up their honor in order for something else that needed to happen. Hashem calls them Reya. It's a fascinating story about the Sdei Chemed. The Sdei Chemed, Rav Chaim Chizkiyahu Medini, lived in Bukhara in the mid-1800s. He was, I think, born 1834 to 1905. And he was a super genius. He single-handedly wrote an encyclopedia that today we would probably have an easier time because we have computers. But he single-handedly wrote a 10-volume encyclopedia of every single halakha you are looking for. How did he do it? He was an absolute genius, no doubt. But he writes that that's not how it happened in the beginning. You see, he was a very mediocre person, just like anybody else. He learned well, he was respected by all, and he was a part of a kollel in his town. And this kollel was personally being funded by a wealthy man in the community, and the kollel was being run in his basement. Everybody loved him. And he grew and grew into becoming an individual that was respected by all in the community, except there was one person, a colleague, that really didn't like him. He was jealous of all the fame and all the respect that he's getting at such a young age. So what did he do? Sadly, one day he went up to one of the women workers, a maid that used to work in that kollel, and offered her a lot of money and said to her, if you take this money, you promise me that you're going to come up with a story that the Sdei Chemet, Rav Chaim, tried to violate you. And she takes the money. It was a lot of money. The next day, she comes out screaming out of the kollel, help, help, I've been violated. Rabbi Chaim tried to violate me. The whole town comes out, and it's an embarrassing scene. And of course, the worst enemy, the person behind the whole story, was right there waiting, shaking his head and going, I can't believe this. I can't believe this guy did this. And this begins the road to the destruction of the Sdei Chemet's life. The embarrassment when no one could believe him. And people come from all over town telling this, the wealthy Jew who was his supporter, you have to fire him. You can't keep somebody like this here. How could you keep someone that has done such a thing? But he knew the Sdei Chemet. He knew that Rab Chaim was a nice person. He was a good person. He was respected by all. He learned all the time. How could he have done such a thing? He was very torn. At the end, he decides to fire the maid. And he does. But that doesn't cool the fires. That doesn't cool the chatter of the town of how much people were speaking negatively about a rabbi that was completely innocent. A few months pass, and this maid eats through the money that she was given. She has no job. She's desperate. She comes back privately to the kollel, goes to Rav Chaim and says, listen, here's what really happened. And I am ready to go openly in public about it if you go and speak to your supporter to hire me back and give me back my job. I will spill all the beans. I will tell everyone who it actually was who hired me. I will clear your name completely. He takes a few minutes and he says to her, as much as I would like that to happen, and as much as I feel a chilul Hashem happen here, by the desecration of God's name, where a Talmid Chacham like myself was accused of such a lowly act, and so many people believed it. However, I think the Chilul Hashem is going to be worse if now we open the story again and we talk about another person that did something even worse, for no reason hired you to hurt another Jew. I can't have that. But I'll tell you what, I'll get your job back. I'll speak to him if you promise me you won't speak a word of this to anyone in public. I don't want this to come out. I'll live with it. The Sdei Chemet says that it was right after this scenario in his life. After this, his mind opened up like a well of information, almost like he had a photographic memory. He couldn't understand what was going on. But later on he understood. It was the blessing from Hashem because he decided to keep his mouth closed. He took silence instead of coming out in the open and talking about his innocence. HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls a person that is silent in a moment of hurt, Reya, my friend, my colleague. That's what happened to the Sdei Chemet. And what do you know? It's fascinating to see, where is Moshe Rabbeinu buried? The greatest prophet of all time. Moshe Rabbeinu, velo kam navi od ke Moshe. There will never ever be another prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu. You would think he would be buried in some... He was outside of Israel, buried in the land that was given to Shevet Gad, outside of Eretz Israel. Unbelievable. The honor that the Shevet of God got just because they kept silent. Rabotai, in our lives, we go through a lot of embarrassing situations. Some that, hey, might be deserving, and a lot that people do not deserve. But who comes out triumphant from this? A person that keeps silent. Chachamim have always said, if you want to get a blessing that works, You want someone to bless you and you want to know whose blessing really has power? Find someone that has been publicly embarrassed and kept their silence and hasn't fought back. You go and ask them for a blessing, because that's a gibor. That's a reya of Hashem. That's a friend of Hashem. That person is close to God. Because after all, we too test God's patience all the time. However, He's Erech HaPayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has so much patience, and He keeps His silence. So when He sees His children act the same way, not only we show Him how close we are to Him, He sees us as truly, truly a friend. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us with all the blessings of Shamayim Va'aretz, Yeshua Benehamot, Beserot Tovot, Amen Ken Yiratzon.